we know what is hemagglutination. Then there is another condition called as hemagglutination inhibition. Hemagglutination inhibition. Here the principle is, see what happens now, the hemagglutinin peptidoglycans are antigenic in nature. These peptidoglycans, that is, so whenever a person gets infection with influenza, these peptidoglycans or hemagglutinin peptidoglycans which are antigenic induces antibodies. So in the body they form specific antibodies. So you know that in the hemagglutination, what is the principle here is the RBC mixes with the hemagglutinin and we at a zone of equivalence, it results in the formation of a lattice formation which will be observed as dark brown shield in the microtiter plate. So that is about hemagglutination. So the same infection, if the influenza infection occurs in the body there forms antibodies. That is, the serum will be having antibodies. So what is the function of antibodies? These antibodies neutralizes or mixes with the antigen and utilizes it and forms an antigen antibody complex, so that antigen will not be available for the combination with the RBC. For example, I will demonstrate here. So this is the RBC, this is the RBC, this is the RBC, and if it is mixed with the hemagglutinin antigens, it results in what happens? The same thing. That is RBC, RBC, RBC. Here lattice is formed. Instead of that, if we have added serum is added. Serum means antibodies. If serum is added, what happens? These antibodies will go and mix with the antigen. So what happens? There will be no antigen in the solution, so that RBC will not form any shield, but they settle down as button in the tray. So this is called as hemagglutination inhibition. So here what is the principle is? The principle is the serum containing hemagglutinin antibodies neutralizes or combines with the hemagglutinin antigens. Once there is hemagglutinin antigens are being utilized, then there is no chance for the RBC to form a lattice. So what happens now? For example, you take a tray and to it add RBC plus hemagglutinin. If it is like that, there is a chance for formation of a shield or button, like that. To it add double dilutions of serum from influenza patient, doubling dilutions of serum from the influenza patient. So what happens here? You have added the doubling dilutions, 1 in 10, 1 in 20, 1 in 40, 1 in 80, 1 in 160, 1 in 320, like that, 1 in 640, it goes on like that. So what happens now? Whenever the antibody mixes with the antigen in equal proportion at the zone of equivalence, it forms a lattice. If not, there is a settlement of the RBC. That is the principle. Now we have added to this one. Now RBC hemagglutinin with its antibody. What happens here? The hemagglutins are being utilized by the antibody. So what happens here? There is a button formation because there is no available antigen. RBC will settle down as a button. Similarly, at 1 in 20 dilution, so imagine that is a similar button is formed. 1 in 40 button is formed. 1 in 80 button is formed, and if there is no button formation, afterwards there is no, imagine that there is no button formation. See, this is 1 in 80 is the highest dilution of the serum, which can react with all the valencies of the available antigen, so that the antigen will be totally utilized by the antibody and RBC will settle down as the button at the bottom. Now at 1 in 160 dilution, antibody is not present sufficiently or antibody is absent. So what happens here? The antigen, the RBC mixes with the hemagglutinin antigen and forms what? A shield, or forms a lattice and forms a shield. So the highest dilution of the serum that inhibits the hemagglutination formation is called as hemagglutination inhibition of that test. This helps. So if it is increased to fourfold, if the serum contains fourfold rise in the antibody, usually says that the patient has suffered from influenza infection. That is about hemagglutination inhibition test. Then coming on to the other topic, what is called as cultivation of viruses. We know that we as microbiologists need one of the thing we have to be doing in the lab is cultivation of organisms. For example, majority of the bacteria or rickettsia or other things can be or not obligate intracellular parasites, so they can be cultured in the inanimate media or in the lab. However, virus, as the definition says, they are obligate intracellular organisms. That means they need a living tissue for its growth. So there are so many methods that have been implemented, that have been practiced for the cultivation of viruses. These include, one is animal inoculation, embryonated egg inoculation technique, or third one is a tissue culture. So animal inoculation, what are the animals? See, trials have been there for so many years. So what type of animals should be used for the cultivation of viruses? At first, Reed is a person who used human volunteers for the study of studies on yellow fever. You know that sacrificing human or human life is more precious, so the trials has been halted to a certain level, at that level. Then Landsteiner used monkeys for the studies on some polio. Landsteiner used monkeys. However, the cost of monkey is higher. Also, handling of monkeys put a problem. Then there is another scientist named Thier. Thier is a scientist who introduced mice or mouse into the lab for the animal inoculation techniques for the culture of the viruses. So mice has been used, and this mostly the infant suckling mice has been used. These infant suckling mice have been used mainly for the studies on the arboviruses and Coxsackie viruses. These infant suckling mice are highly susceptible for the viruses, and they can be studied. These infant suckling mice can be inoculated intraoperatorily, intranasally, subcutaneously, or intracerebrally. So this handling of the mice is a little bit easy, and it gives so many routes for inoculation, which is good for the studies. So many studies were done, and other animals like guinea pig, ferrets are also being used as laboratory animals for the studies on the viruses. Of course, this is giving good results. However, there is some difficulties. One is handling of the animals itself. It needs a technique, and these are animals, means these are living creatures. So automatically there may be innate immunity. So this innate immunity may interfere with the growth of the viruses, which is a big problem. And we need to maintain animal houses for the maintenance. So there is a little bit of difficulties in maintaining, though there are certain benefits out of it. Apart from that, how the disease can be studied, how the development of disease can be studied in these animals is either it is revealed either due to the death of the animal or maybe disease seen in the animals. So the biggest problem is here we had to sacrifice the animal, or the animal we had to look for the any diseases development in the animal. So these are the certain limitations for the use of the animals. Then embryonated egg. What is embryonated egg? This embryonated egg this embryonated egg gives different parts for the studies. See, this is the embryonated egg, and this embryonated egg has different parts, namely albumin, air sac, outer shell, chorioallantoic membrane, yolk sac, embryo, surrounding that embryo is amniotic cavity, and between amniotic cavity and the chorioallantoic membrane is the allantoic cavity. So we have to select an embryonated egg from size of the days from 5 to 12 days are the ideal, because during this period all the viral studies can be made easily and they can be harvested easily. So an embryonated egg of 5 to 12 days can be used, and because it gives wide chances for the development or the cultivation of different viruses. So this is the yolk sac, and before starting any inoculation to the embryonated egg, we must know whether this embryonated egg is alive or not, because it is an obligated intracellular parasite, so there should be a life, continuation of life should be there. So how will you know whether the embryonated egg is alive or not? By doing torch test or candle test, and another is the heat test. So this torch test, whenever we see this embryonated egg in the dark room against the torch, we can see a black spot. This black spot corresponds to the developing embryo. So that means the given egg is embryonated. That is, the developing a black spot denotes that in the egg the embryo is developing. And if the torch is the same thing with the candle also, you can see it. Apply some liquid paraffin around the egg and see under dark, we will see the black spot. Then we should know whether the egg is alive or not, the embryo is alive or not. So you have to put some heat. You have to put some heat at one end. If you put with a candle or something else, if you put some heat, what happens? This is the egg. You are putting some heat here. What happens? Because of continuous production of heat, the embryo which is present inside makes some movement, which can be observed. So movement of the embryo denotes that the given embryo is alive, and torch test which shows a black spot denotes that it is an embryonated egg. Then what are the different layers that can be used for the growth of or for the cultivation of different viruses? First and foremost is the chorioallantoic membrane. Chorioallantoic membrane. This chorioallantoic membrane, here usually an embryonated egg of 10 to 12 days old taken, and this chorioallantoic membrane is used for the development or cultivation of pox viruses, vaccinia, variola viruses, It can be also used for herpes simplex viruses. So here, whenever the pox virus is developed, it produces plaques. It is on the correlating membrane. This growth of the virus can be seen as a development of plaques. So by counting the number of pox, we can say that how many viruses are present in the given sample. Apart from that, we have to see, is the nature of the pox, is it necrotic, is it hemorrhagic, is it non-necrotic, non-hemorrhagic. This also gives an idea for the identification of different viruses. After correlating membrane, what is the next? Next is the allantoic cavity. This allantoic cavity, best is a 9 to 11 days old immunotag is taken, and this helps for the isolation of influenza virus, influenza and para-influenza viruses. Also, this allantoic cavity helps for the development of influenza vaccines. Influenza vaccines. Then comes to the yolk sac. This yolk sac, usually 5 to 7 days old, is ideal. 5 to 7 days old immunotag is ideal for the studies on yolk sac, and this yolk sac helps for the development of chlamydia and rickettsia. This is useful. Then what is left over is the amniotic. This amniotic also around 10 days old immunotag is taken, and this helps for the primary isolation of influenza viruses. Primary isolation of influenza viruses. This immunotag also is useful, either immunotag hen's egg or more best is duck egg, because of its large space. We can use it for the development of rabies flu vaccine or 17D yellow fever vaccine. So this immunotag helps for the cultivation of viruses, that is for the primary isolation, and also it helps for the development of vaccines. Here, contrary to the animals, here handling of the eggs is very easy, they are very cheap, they are easily available, sterilization of the egg is easy and handling is easy, and even in the lab also making adjustments or rotations at frequent intervals is also easy. So immunotag eggs are the one of the, and it gives different spaces for the identification of different viruses. Next comes the tissue culture. Here, so as you know that viruses are obligate intracellular parasites, and they live and they grow in the tissues which are living tissues. So these tissue cultures are of three types, namely organ culture, explant culture, and third is the cell culture. So organ, so as the name says, we have the virus will be grown on certain organs specifically. So for example, there are certain organs which have certain specific sites of localization or development. For example, the coronavirus grows very well on the tracheal rings. So taking this into consideration, organ culture, here a part of an organ is taken and it is maintained for a few days to weeks, maintaining its original architecture and also its physiology. So a part of the organ is taken, for example, a tracheal ring is taken and its function, physiological function and its anatomical architecture is maintained, and to it we can using it we can identify whether the given sample contains coronavirus or not, because this coronavirus grows on the tracheal ring easily. Then comes the explant culture. This explant culture is the first and most first used medium for the virus culture. Here a tissue is taken, specific tissue is taken, and it is rinsed, it is made into explant, or it could be made into a suspension, and it is used for the growth of the specific viruses. For example, there are certain viruses which grow better in certain tissues. For example, in the explant culture, an adenoid tissue is taken. This adenoid tissue is a site of predilection for the growth of adenoviruses. So, explant culture is used for the identification of adenoviruses. That is about the organ culture and explant culture. Next comes the cell culture. Here, what is the principle behind the cell culture here is, cells from different parts of the body, different ages of the body will be taken. Sorry, or else here this cell culture, tissues are taken and it is made into individual cells by treating the tissues with proteolytic enzymes like trypsin, or by mechanical shaking. So now the tissues, from the tissues we have got individual cells. These individual cells are thoroughly washed, counted and suspended in a growth medium. So what is the growth medium? This growth medium consists of essential amino acids, vitamins, sugars, salts, buffering agents, %5 cough serum, phenol, red indicator. So, a tissue is taken and it is subject for proteolytic enzymes or mechanical shaking such that individual cells are formed and are obtained. These individual cells are washed and it is counted and they are suspended into the growth medium. This growth medium consists of essential amino acids, vitamins, sugars, salts, buffering agents, cough serum, antibiotics and phenol red indicator. Antibiotics automatically suppress the development of any contaminated bacteria. So, in this growth medium, what happens now? The virus, these individual cells, so it is a growth medium for these individual cells, understand. So, the individual cells in the growth medium will develop. So, this growth medium can be transferred into a petri dishes or into a test tubes or small bottles. This growth medium can be taken into as different ways. In these petri dish or test tubes or small bottles, what happens, these cells, individual cells in the growth medium go on developing and forms a single monolayer. It forms a single monolayer. This monolayer can be used for the cultivation of viruses. How this cultivation of viruses is again of two types: stationary cultivation, wherein these tubes or petri dishes can be kept as such like that in the incubator and observed for the growth of the viruses, or it can be taken into the small bottles and it is screw tight, and it is usually for fastidious organisms, and it should be rotation drums. It could be kept in the rotation drums for the good aeration. This helps for the viruses to grow. So whatever this thing, this again the tissues. Now we are coming on to the tissues. What are the types of tissues that can be used for the growth of the viruses. What are the types of tissues that can be used for the growth of the viruses? These include three types of tissues. One is the primary cell culture. Two, diploid cell strain. Three, continuous cell line. So three types of tissue cultures, cell cultures are again present. One is primary cell culture, second is a diploid cell strain, and third is a continuous cell line. It is a culture, it is a strain, it is a lines. How? In the primary cell culture, it is usually used for the primary isolation of the virus and for the vaccine production. Here, the cells are derived from the freshly from the body. The cells are derived freshly from the body, and these are used for the primary isolation vaccine production. And here these freshly isolated cells allows only for maintenance or growth only for a certain short period of time. It does not allow for serial passage. It does not allow serial passages. It is not useful for the storage. It is only for the primary isolation. So, to understand in a better way, this classification of primary cell cultures, diploid cell strain or continuous cell line has been made based upon the cells. It has been taken, cells, biology of the cells, normal cells or cancer cells, or chromosomal pattern or karyotyping, and permission for serial passage. Permission for serial passages. Permission means, is it possible for a continuous serial passage or not at all possible, or limited serial passage is there. So based upon the biology of cells, based upon the chromosomal karyotyping retention, and based upon the serial allowance for the serial passage, there are primary cell cultures, diploid cell strains, and continuous cell line. So in the primary cell culture, freshly prepared tissues are taken. For example, the tissues from the human amnion or human embryo kidney is taken, or monkey kidney. So tissues directly from fresh sample from the human amnion, human embryonic kidney or monkey kidney taken, and this is useful for the primary isolation and vaccine production. This is primary cell cultures. Next comes the diploid cell strain. Here it is a strain. Here the samples are usually taken from the fibroblasts. It is the samples, tissue samples are taken from the fibroblasts. The reason is here serial passage up to 50 times is allowed. Serial passage up to 50 times is allowed. After that, there is cell senescence of the, that is dying of the cells. Senescence of the cells occurs. Here, the another important, all the cells are single type. All the diploid cell strain, all are single type of cells. And another important thing is they will retain diploid chromosomal pattern and karyotyping up to these 50 passages. So diploid cell strain, examples are the fibroblasts, and further examples include WI38, West Indies like that. So WI38, it is taken from the human embryo lung strain. So here always strain is, you have to mention, for diploid cell strain you mention the strain, human embryo lung strain. Or another thing is HL8, rhesus monkey strain. So important feature is here it is from the fibroblasts, which is allows 50% serial passage only up to 50 times. Afterwards senescence of the cells occurs. This helps and further these cells retain the original diploid chromosomes and karyotyping up to 50 times of passages, and this is also used similar to the primary cell cultures. It is also used for the primary isolation and also for vaccine production. The examples include WA38 human embryo lung strain or HL8 rhesus monkey strain. Next comes the continuous cell line. As the name says, here every chance that here it is now only limited, it is up to here there is a chance for serial passage any number of times. Allows for serial passage continuously. So it is a cell line that allows continuous serial passages and helps for storage for any length of time if it is stored at -70 degrees centigrade. And here the cells are usually taken cell lines, that is individual cells are taken usually from the cancer cells. These are taken from the cancer cells, and the examples are cancer cells, HeLa cells, that is human carcinoma of cervix cell line. So continuous cell line, always the suffix is cell line. For diploid cell strain, the suffix is strain. For primary, it is okay. So cancer continuous cell lines examples are human carcinoma of cervix cell line. Otherwise, McCoy cell line, that is human synovial carcinoma cell line. That is there is another cell strain called as Vero cell line, that is derived from the velvet monkey cell line, and this velvet monkey cell line, also called as Vero cell line, is also used for the development of rabies vaccine. So to complete, viral culture can be done by one is animal inoculation, and second one is immunotech inoculation, and third is the tissue culture. Under tissue culture, there is organ culture. For example, you can use tracheal ring for the identification of coronaviruses. Explant culture, adenoid tissue can be used for the growth of adenoviruses. Cell cultures, under cell culture, from the tissues, individual cells can be taken, and the individual cells washed and kept in the growth medium. This growth medium helps for the growth of the cells, and they forms a single layer. So this single layer, this inoculated virus will grow. So depending upon the cells, from where we have obtained the cells, from the nature of the cells or time of allowance for the serial passage, these cell cultures can be primary cell culture, it could be diploid cell culture, or it could be continuous cell line culture. Primary cell culture allows is from the freshly prepared tissues, and usually from the human amnion, human embryonic kidney, or monkey kidney. Here serial passage is not possible. It is only for primary isolation and for vaccine production. Next comes the diploid cell strain. Here it is usually applied from the fibroblast, allows for 50 times serial passages, and here it is also for primary isolation and for the vaccine production. Here, as long as growth is there, it permits diploid cell chromosomes, and karyotyping is not disturbed at all. Then comes the continuous cell line. So example for this diploid cell strain is the fibroblast WA38 human embryo lung strain, HL8 rhesus monkey strain. Next comes the continuous cell line. Here this is obtained from the cancer cells, usually HeLa cell, that is human carcinoma of cervix cell line, or McCoy human synovial carcinoma cell line, or velvet, that is Vero cell line, velvet monkey cell line, which helps for the development of rabies vaccine. Here continuous for lifetime storage is possible, serial passage is possible for indefinite period of time. So this is about the cultivation of the viruses. Once you have obtained that we have done the cultivation of the viruses, then we must be knowing that whether the virus has grown or not. So this is all about virus. Then how will you know that the virus is grown or not? Because it is you have to demonstrate the growth of the virus such that you can go for further studies. So this virus growth can be noticed one by doing cytopathic effects. 2. Metabolic inhibition. 3. Heme adsorption. 4. Interference. 5. Transformation. 6. By immunofluorescence techniques. See, whenever a person enters into the room, there will be some changes. Similarly, there is some disturbance like that. So similarly, in the monolayers, if a virus enters into the body, into the monolayers, it produces certain changes, but not all viruses. Only a few viruses produce cytopathic changes. They are called as cytopathogenic viruses. Some does not produce; they come and go calmly. They are called as non-cytopathogenic viruses. Coming into the cytopathic viruses, CPE, different viruses produces different types of cytopathic effects by which you can identify the viruses. For example, enteroviruses. Enteroviruses, this produces one crenation and diffuse degeneration of entire cell layer. It may produce crenation of the cells first. Second is diffuse degeneration of the entire monocell layer. That is about enteroviruses. Then measles. You know that the cells, each and every cell will be having individual walls like that. But if in the cell, if the measles virus is there, it produces syncytial formation. That is, the walls will be lost. So if there is syncytial cells are present, then it is a syncytial changes. Then the inoculum consists of measles viruses. For example, adenoviruses. In the adenoviruses, there develops group-like clusters. In the monolayers, there is a group-like clusters formation similar to that of bunch of grapes. Bunch of grapes, if you see grape-like clusters or group of clusters are there, then imagine that the cytopathogenic effect is because of adenoviruses. Then there is sometimes herpes viruses. Herpes viruses. This also produces changes. However, it produces only focal degeneration. It produces focal degeneration. That is, for enteroviruses, crenation and diffuse degeneration, whereas herpes only focal degeneration. Measles, syncytial formation. Adenovirus, grape-like clusters formation. That is about the cytopathic effects. There are certain viruses which does not produce any changes, that we'll be studying afterwards. Then coming on to the metabolic inhibition. So what happens whenever a cell is growing? What happens? You know that in the growth medium, all the cells which you have studied will grow. So once any cell is grown, normally when a cell is grown, what happens? It undergoes metabolism. During the process of metabolism, acid is produced. Acid is produced. It is a routine thing for any this thing. And there is what is the one of the important constituent in the growth medium? It is the phenol red. This phenol red is red in color during alkali environment and it becomes yellow. It becomes yellow. So metabolic inhibition means if the cells are growing, because if you have not added any virus, the cells will go and form a monolayer. During the process of metabolism of cells, acid will be released and it produces yellow color to the medium. Instead, if virus is grown, we have inoculated, if it grows, it inhibits the cell metabolism. But it grows. Virus grows and automatically it inhibits the cell metabolism. When cell metabolism is stopped, there is no acid production, there is no change in the color. So by observing no change in the color, we can say that the inoculum consists of virus. Then what next one is the HA, heme adsorption. heme adsorption. These influenza viruses, apart from heme agglutination, there is also got another property called as heme adsorption. That is, it's not only agglutination, they are on any surface, if RBC is present, it absorbs, adsorption. Not absorption, it is absorption. So what happens now? This is a cell line. In the cell line, you know that whether the virus is growing or not, you don't know. To it, we have added RBC. Guinea pig RBC is added from guinea pig. It is put on this thing. What happens now? And clean it. Automatically happens now. The viruses, if there is a growth of Haemophilus influenza, influenza virus growth is there, it adsorbs the RBC. So demonstration of adsorption of RBC indicates that there is growth of the virus in the inoculum. Next comes the interference. Always there is one dictum is there, namely in the inoculum, if one virus is there, it does not allow another virus to grow. Another virus will not be grown. So it is in the viral culture media, if there is growth of one virus, it does not allow the growth of another virus. This process is called as interference. So we know if it is a cytopathogenic virus, we know you can observe the cytopathogenic changes. So interference is the mechanism that can be studied for the non-cytopathogenic effect viruses. So what happens here now? First, you have inoculated some non-cytopathogenic protein onto the viral medium. You have incubated for some time, and you don't know whether there is virus grown or not. To this, secondly, you add some viruses which produces cytopathic effects. Known virus, either it should be a enterovirus, measles virus, adenovirus, or herpes virus. So known viruses that produce cytopathic effects should be added. If you observe any changes, in the growth media in the cell line, that indicates there is no growth of in the first inoculum. That is, if in the first inoculum there is a growth of course if it is a non-cytopathogenic effect, this CPE which you have added second time will not grow. So the principle in the interference is, if one virus is grown in the viral medium, it does not allow the growth of another virus. This process is used for the identification of growth of non-cytopathogenic effect viruses. So after incubation of living for some time, to demonstrate the presence of non-cytopathogenic viruses, we have to add into this medium some viruses which produce cytopathic effects. So if growth of cytopathic change second virus is not observed, it indicates that there is chance for the development of non-cytopathic viruses. That is, first inoculum is showing growth. Next comes the transformation. Normally what happens? Normally what happens? This is a cell, automatically the cell will grow on. If the cell go on, automatically if one cell touches, this will not grow. That is, automatically there is contact inhibition. Contact inhibition will be present in normal cells. So however, if into this viral medium, if we added oncogenic viruses, then these oncogenic viruses inhibits, which are growing in the cells, inhibits the contact inhibition. So automatically the oncogenic viruses which are growing here grow on. It grows like that, it grows everywhere. So it results in the formation of microtumors. Demonstration of microtumors indicates that there is transformation in the nature of the cells. Normally cells exhibit contact inhibition. If in the viral medium there is a growth of oncogenic viruses which inhibits the contact inhibition, which transforms the cells by producing no contact inhibition, they produce microtumors. By this we can demonstrate if the sample contains any oncogenic viruses or not. Next, finally, immunofluorescence. Immunofluorescence, we have done, this is the best method and easiest method and the earliest method for the demonstration of growth of viruses in the viral culture media. So what happens in the viral media? There is a growth of viruses. We know that if you are suspecting influenza virus, or if you can take influenza specific antibodies which are conjugated with fluorescein, or if you are suspecting measles with measles antibodies conjugated with the fluorescein. So what happens if the growth, there is a growth is there, and specific antibodies which are conjugated to the fluorescein is added, and if you see under the microscope, if there is a demonstration of fluorescence, it indicates that the specific viral growth is present. So immunofluorescence is the technique wherein specific viral growth can be demonstrated by treating the medium monolayers with the specific antibody conjugated with the fluorescein. So if you have done it, automatically if there is a presence of fluorescence indicates that there is a growth of viruses. So this completes about the viral inoculation. We'll take afterwards. Thank you.